I knew something was off when I smelled burnt motor grease before I even stepped onto the floor. Conveyor 2C was whining again, just a hair off alignment, and if you knew how to listen, it sounded like a dying raccoon stuck in a tuba. But that was my rhythm. 19 years of it. My boots hit the same scuffed concrete at 6:43 a.m., same corner coffee in hand, same nod to old Pete by the coolant tanks, still insisted the vending machine stole his quarters on purpose. I didn't argue. Some machines here were petty like that. The hum of the belts, that was my morning prayer. I'd walk the length of Hollowgate's line like a surgeon doing rounds, except instead of heartbeats, I listened for hitches in gear timing, thermal expansion drift, sensor lag. My fingers could read miscalibration like Braille. Had a logbook thick enough to stop a bullet. Of the entries in shorthand, only 3 of us still remembered. The other 2, long retired or dead. It was just me now. I made my way past the junction behind Sector 7, where the new auto dashboard glitched last week and nearly spat out a shipment of half-assembled toaster guts. Chloe's upgrade. She called it modern efficiency, which was rich coming from someone who thought a torque wrench was a tick-tock dance. Still, I noted the spike on the thermal readout again, mentioned it to the floor tech. He glanced up, shrugged, said, Chloe said not to overthink it. Right. God forbid we overthink the 2,000 synchronized belts that kept the place from becoming a very expensive steel piñata. It wasn't just about routine. It was a feel, a breath. And if you've ever worked in a place like this, where everything depends on everyone doing their job without applause, you'll get why what happened next felt like being gut-punched through your coveralls. But before we get there, if you've made it this far, do me a favor, tap subscribe. Yeah, I know nobody likes being asked, but it keeps the folks behind the scenes caffeinated enough to keep these stories coming. And believe me, this one, you're going to want to hear how it ends. Back to it. I checked the pressure tolerance on the overflow line, 2 psi off. Not enough to trigger an alert on Chloe's shiny dashboard, but enough to cook a batch of plastic molds by lunch if it kept creeping. I made a manual note. Tap the old analog gauge twice for good luck, just like Carl taught me back in 06 when the floor flooded, and we nearly lost a week's output to thermal warping. I passed Debbie near the punch press. She handed me a roll of electrical tape without even asking. Panel 9 again? I nodded. She smiled. That's how things worked around here. Quiet rhythms, muscle memory, trust. But I wasn't naive. I'd seen the writing on the wall weeks ago when the owner's daughter started slinking around in those $900 boots that had no business stepping through a loading bay. She didn't speak to us, just filmed little reels for her manufacturing chic series or whatever garbage she was posting. Kept saying things like legacy overhead and streamlining dead weight. I knew what it meant, I just didn't know when. That day I walked slower on my rounds, not to drag my feet but to listen deeper. I took one more reading at Junction 5, where the hydraulic sink was always a twitch away from throwing off the main flow. Quiet buzz was off by a few decibels, probably nothing. Probably. I backed up the configs before lunch. Plugged in my old flash drive, scratched, duct-taped, barely holding together. Copied over the core calibration suite. It wasn't company property, not really. Half those configs were tweaks I'd done myself over 2 decades. Stuff that lived in my head more than the mainframe. The company version was sanitized. Mine had notes like, don't touch this unless you want to wake up to 300 rejected pallets and Pete screaming like a banshee. I labeled the file, if you really need me zip. Then I finished my sandwich in the break room with 3 other people who didn't say much. We didn't need to. Our silence was comfort. Our silence was knowledge. I felt it, like a pressure drop before a storm. Something in the air shifted, a stillness in the rhythm. The kind that tells a seasoned mechanic to grab a wrench before someone grabs a fire extinguisher. I just didn't know that by the end of that shift, be walking out for what they thought was the last time, and that by dinner time, the place would sound like a robot funeral on fire. I was tightening a mounting bracket near line 3 when the stiletto click-clack echoed like a goddamn threat. You ever hear heels on concrete in a place that smells like scorched polymers and hydraulic fluid? Doesn't fit. Like a clown at a funeral. I looked up, and there she was, Chloe Hollowgate, rest to the kingdom of conveyor belts and carpal tunnel. Rocking a white blazer you could lose a mortgage payment to, phone in hand, selfie mode on, chirping something like, just another day at the legacy plant. To her gaggle of influencer friends. One of them asked if OSHA was a skincare brand. I kept my eyes on the bracket, but I was listening. You always listen when people like that tour your ground, like they're scouting it for demolition. She pointed at the rusted catwalks and said, "It's like a grandpa's shed, right? So aesthetic." I could have laughed if I hadn't already spent 12 years begging upper management for safety rail funding that never came because profits were tight. They strutted past the precision tools like they were props. Like the belts didn't move 80 tons of product a day. Like lives hadn't been broken and built in here. Then I saw him, cousin Jason, apparently. Fresh-cut fade, brand new steel toes that still had the stuffing in him, a button-up that had never met sweat. Chloe beamed like she'd invented him herself. "This is Jason. He's just finished scaling a startup in Dayton, AI-based fulfillment optimization. Super cutting edge. He'll be shadowing our operations team before, well, taking over some legacy roles." Legacy roles. I felt that phrase hit me in the ribs like a crowbar. "Is that the gal you mentioned?" One of the influencers asked, sipping something pink out of a protein shaker. Chloe turned to me like I was a roach she just remembered she hadn't stepped on yet. "Oh, Melanie, hey, yeah, so we're giving your job to my cousin." Just like that. No meeting, no paperwork, no HR sanitized send-off or "we regret to inform you." Just standing in grease-stained coveralls with a wrench in one hand and my relevance being chucked out like last week's cracked gaskets. No severance. No thanks. Not even a fake hug. I stared at her for a second too long. You could tell it made her nervous. Not because I'm scary, because I didn't flinch. I wiped my hands on a rag, folded it slow. "Be sure he knows where the manual valve override is," I said. "It drifts sometimes in the cold." Jason gave me a smile like I was a dog that just barked funny. Chloe laughed and said, "Oh, I'm sure the software will catch that kind of thing." "Yeah, okay." I walked past them, logged my final entry in the calibration book. Handoff denied. Recommend system audit. Slid it back in my drawer. Clocked out at 5:02. Nobody followed, not that I expected them to. Outside, the rain had started. Not a storm. Just that steady misty kind that soaks you slow and silent. Pennsylvania in late fall, the air smells like rust and endings. I stood by my truck for a minute, listening to the factory hum like it always had. Lights inside flickered. Conveyor 2C coughed, real soft. I smiled. They had no idea what they'd done, not really, because I wasn't just in the system. I was the system. The spaghetti was overcooked and the sauce came from a jar, but I didn't care. I ate it straight from the saucepan with a fork I didn't bother rinsing first. Old habits die hard when your shift used to end at midnight, and dinner was whatever didn't rot in the fridge. I sat by the open screen door, kind with the bent corner that lets in every goddamn mosquito in Pennsylvania, and I listened. There it was, low and steady, the hum of Hollowgate Manufacturing, 4 blocks east and downhill. If the wind blew just right, you could catch it like a whisper through the trees. A soft mechanical lullaby, belts, gears, pressure valves clicking in their unison symphony. But tonight it sounded off. Not broken. Not yet, just unsure. Like a band playing without their drummer. I took a swig of beer and leaned back in the creaky chair that used to be my dad's. Let my boots rest on the screen's bottom rail. And for a second, I let it all wash over me. Not just the day, not just the insult, but the years. All of them. I remembered my first shift at that plant. 19 years ago, give or take. I showed up wearing knockoff work boots from a discount bin and a ponytail that still smelled like cheap conditioner. But the older guys gave me the side eye, like they didn't think I'd last past lunch. Hell, I wasn't sure either, but I learned, fast, faster than anyone wanted me to. I memorized the rhythm of the belts before I learned half the employees' names. I figured out that conveyor 9 liked to seize up in humidity, and that line 6 coolant valve needed a slap with a socket wrench when the pressure dipped. Nobody taught me that. The manuals didn't have it. I listened. I adjusted. I tuned the floor like a damn instrument. I outlasted 3 plant managers, survived 3 system overhauls, 2 budget collapses, and 1 fire. I trained people who got promoted over me, replaced me, forgot me. But the machines didn't forget. That hum knew me. It trusted me. I got up, walked to the junk drawer, pulled out the old flash drive I'd used since before anyone knew what cloud storage meant. It had my initials in Sharpie and a crack in the plastic where it once got slammed in a file cabinet. I plugged it into my laptop, opened the calibration suite. There it was, the master file. A Frankenstein mix of legacy configs, manual overrides, hand-typed notes, and patches I'd coded myself when the new software didn't account for belt lag. I hovered over the file name for a second. Thought about just deleting it. Let them drown in their pride. Instead, I renamed it. If you really need me zip dragged it to the desktop. Took another sip of beer. They'd need me, Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But when the cold snap hit and the manual valve drifted 0.8 degrees too far, or when conveyor 7 stuttered during a triple load and the software shrugged its shoulders, that's when they'd remember the woman in the oil-stained jacket they tossed out like expired lunch meat. That's when they'd call. They wouldn't get the same Melanie. They'd get the version who knew exactly what she was worth. And this time, she'd make damn sure they learned it too. At 5:29 p.m., Conveyor 6A coughed like it swallowed a wrench. Not loud, just a metallic hiccup in the belly of the beast. Most folks wouldn't have noticed, but old Pete did. He'd been sweeping near the torque rack when it happened, and he froze mid-push like his spine had heard it first. A minute later, Conveyor 7B stuttered, then surged. Not enough to stop the line, but enough to scatter product like confetti down the chute. A dozen hydraulic arms twitched out of sync, spilling molded casings into the collection bins like busted teeth. Nobody said anything yet, not at first, because you never want to admit a system that big just flinched. By 5:47, 3 lines were flagged for recalibration. Jason hadn't noticed, was still busy taking selfies in the control room with Chloe's overpriced tablet, grinning like he'd cracked the Pentagon because he learned how to mute the alarms. Then 6 o'clock hit. 30% of the belts off tempo. Load timings collapsed into a chaotic symphony of near misses and hot spots. Section 4 overheated. One temperature sensor read 0. Another read 217 degrees Fahrenheit. Neither was true, but the system didn't care, just obeyed the numbers. A junior tech named Ramon, who'd only been on the floor 2 weeks, ran to the terminal and tried a manual reboot. The screen blinked. Invalid credential. He tried again. Same result. The terminal wasn't locked, it just didn't recognize him or anyone. Because nobody ever revoked Melanie's credentials. He called IT. They were confused. She's still showing as primary operator. Someone mumbled on the phone. The override token's been deactivated. That's not supposed to be possible. Meanwhile, Chloe was standing in the upstairs office with a kombucha in one hand and a spreadsheet on her phone, completely unaware that downstairs was sounding more and more like a malfunctioning pinball machine. Jason tried to explain it away. It's just some legacy issue. The system's outdated. I was literally just talking to a guy in Dayton about migrating us to a smarter backend. Fine smarter, Pete muttered as he unplugged a melting actuator. Chloe flapped her hand like she was swatting flies. Tell IT to hard reset the interface. Just reboot it. That's what tech does, right? Pete looked at her. His face, usually lined with indifference, was creased now with something sharper. You can't just reset a mechanical system mid-load. It's not a Netflix app. This is a chain reaction. You reboot without sync, you burn the floor. Chloe had already turned away, texting someone. Probably another behind-the-scenes post for her followers. By 6:08, the factory sounded wrong. The hum, the rhythm, it was broken, lurching. Half the sensors were offline. Half the backups weren't syncing. The auto-sorting arm dropped an entire crate of semi-melted plastic parts. Emergency lights started blinking amber. The AI assistant chirped like a wounded bird. Still, Chloe smirked, sipping her ginger turmeric like she'd just won a poker hand she didn't understand. That's when the night foreman stormed in. Boots slamming like thunder on the metal stairs, hard hat askew, jaw clenched. He didn't knock, just pushed the door open so hard the stopper cracked. Tell me you didn't fire the system calibrator. Silence. Jason blinked. We reassigned her. Chloe said, I don't care what Chloe said. The foreman's voice was steel dragged across gravel. You know what a cascade fault is? No, good. Cause we're 3 minutes from one. And the only person who could have stopped it clocked out yesterday with a damn smirk. Chloe swallowed. First time she'd looked small. Her mouth opened, then closed again like a goldfish at a funeral. Down on the floor, 2 lines were manually shut down to avoid damage. Production metrics dropped 41%. Orders backlogged. Every operator who knew better had already stopped looking at Jason. The machines were still moving, but now they moved scared. Offbeat, out of tune, like a drummer missing from the band. By 7:11 p.m., the first full line went dark. Not paused, not flagged. Dead. Conveyor 4C gave up the ghost with a high-pitched whine and a flicker of sparks as the auto brake failed to engage. The belt seized mid-load, backing up 2 feeder units and knocking 1,200 half-formed casings out of alignment. Then the real unraveling began. Over in Sector 9, a mechanical pusher fired prematurely, driving a finished unit clean through its packaging. The sound echoed like a shotgun blast. Workers ducked. One operator hit the emergency stop, not because protocol told him to, but because instinct did. He was shaking when he stepped back. By 7:38, 6 lines were halted, 3 manually, 3 by mechanical fail-safes that hadn't tripped in a decade. The emergency shipment due for 8 o'clock, a contract deal with a buyer that had penalties per minute written into the fine print, wasn't even halfway assembled. Jason had stopped pretending. His collared shirt was soaked through, hair stuck to his forehead, tie wrapped around his hand like a pressure bandage for ego wounds. He was at the console, flipping between tabs of digital schematics, each more useless than the last. "Where the hell is the override timing config?" he barked. Pete leaned over his shoulder, squinted, and said flatly, "That's not even our model. That's the system they use at Hollowgate East, or Hollowgate Main. Whole different load profile." Jason looked like he'd just been told gravity was optional. Chloe stood at the glass office window, staring blankly at the mess below. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. The last thing she'd said, before the belt snapped near the cooling tanks, was something about calling the vendor. No vendor was going to fix this. Not when the timing sync relied on handwritten notes kept in a battered 3-ring binder with coffee stains and duct tape. The same binder Chloe once laughed at, called it a boomer Bible. It was now locked inside Melanie's desk drawer, right beneath the handwritten calibration map that showed how to reprime the belt oscillators without frying the entire control system. Jason finally turned and snapped, "We need her files." Pete didn't look up. "Too bad you fired her." Chloe whispered, almost to herself. She said something, valve drift in the cold. What did she mean? Pete turned slowly. She meant the machines don't care what your app says. They care what Melanie said. Jason's hands trembled, pulled up a software override form, hit submit, and got another credential error. The factory had locked him out again. Back in the control room, red lights blinked like Christmas in hell. The AI assistant kept saying load sync error every 30 seconds, cheerful and oblivious. Somewhere in the maintenance bay, a cooling unit hissed louder than it should have. The heat had climbed 6 degrees across the plant floor. Nobody knew why. By 8:05 p.m., shipment deadline passed. Chloe's phone buzzed with a missed call from corporate procurement. By 8:17 p.m., union reps had arrived, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning every inch of the chaos. By 8:22 p.m., Jason had officially stopped speaking. And across town, under a crocheted blanket her mother made before the arthritis took her hands, Melanie slept. Peacefully. No alarms, no blinking lights, just the soft whir of a box fan in the corner and the muted sigh of rain tapping on the tin edge of her porch roof. In the plant, the hum was gone. And in her sleep, Melanie didn't even twitch. The owner called at 9:03 p.m., not a text, not a Slack message. An actual phone call, something he hadn't done in years unless someone died or the plant caught fire. Chloe answered on the second ring, voice tight with pretend calm. "Hi, Daddy." His voice hit like a rusted crowbar through drywall. "What the hell is going on at my factory?" She hesitated. Then, with all the maturity of a YouTube apology video, "It's like a system glitch. Maybe an electrical fault." Jason's looking into it. There was a pause on the line, not silence. Just the kind of pause that tells you someone's eyes just narrowed in real life. "I've got procurement breathing down my neck, Karen in legal screaming about breach clauses, your mother texting me about influencer drama. Don't insult me with system glitch. Put someone competent on the phone." Chloe looked around. Jason was in the server room, hunched over the mainframe like a man reading his own autopsy report. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above him. His button-up was untucked, face pale and streaked with tears. At some point, he'd opened a Red Bull and spilled it on his lap. He didn't notice. The floor foreman, Greg, and whose beard had seen more recessions than Chloe had seen job titles, walked in without knocking. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't yelling, that made it worse. He held the call button up. "Mr. Hollowgate wants someone competent, here." He handed her the phone. Chloe froze, the foreman took it. "This is Greg," he said, voice low. "Even you want the truth? You removed the one person who knew where the damn heartbeat was, a beat." "Yes, sir, her, Melanie." Another pause. "No, she didn't document everything. Because not everything can be documented when you've got 20 years of calibrations done by feel, not code. Your daughter canned the brainstem of this floor and replaced her with a startup brat who couldn't find the load sync register with both hands and a map." Chloe opened her mouth to object. Greg held up a hand without looking at her, like she was a dog barking at the moon. "No, sir, I'm not being dramatic. Veyer 6A collapsed mid-shift. 7B through load errors. Temp sensors failed. Emergency orders missed. We've got union reps counting minutes. And your cousin Jason? Greg pointed with his thumb toward the flickering server room, where Jason was whispering something about rollback protocols to a terminal that refused to even recognize him. He's crying in the dark, sir. Greg handed the phone back to Chloe. She didn't take it. Instead, the factory CFO, an anemic man named Phil who rarely looked up from his spreadsheets, slid into the room with a folder and a face like he'd just read his own firing notice. "We need to call her," Phil said. Chloe blinked. "Who? Melanie?" "No." "Chloe," Phil said, softer now, like he was negotiating with a hostage taker. "If we don't fulfill those contracts by morning, it's breach territory. Not a slap on the wrist, millions. Arbitration, legal review, audit flags on our vendor scorecards. We'll bleed for months. And you know what I don't see in our burn rate?" He held up a spreadsheet with a red box circled in Sharpie. "Catastrophic failure due to ego." Chloe said nothing. Phil leaned forward. "She has a flash drive, a backup of her configs. We both know it. That's what she does. She prepared for you." Jason suddenly appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up, lips trembling. "Tried the override script, it locked me out again. It says access denied, legacy token conflict. I think she booby-trapped it." Greg chuckled. Phil didn't. Chloe's hands shook. She picked up her phone, hovered over Melanie's contact. She didn't dial. Not yet. Because calling meant admitting something she'd never said aloud. That someone older, quieter, less polished, and more essential than she'd ever be had built something irreplaceable. And tonight, it was breaking because of her. Call came at 6:42 a.m. sharp. Not a minute earlier, not a second later. Melanie was already awake, sitting at her tiny kitchen table in a robe that had seen better years, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Employee." The screen door was open again. Autumn wind curled in like a warning. She could already hear it. The factory wasn't humming. It was coughing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. She stared at it for a second, picked it up and said nothing. Let the silence answer. A familiar voice came through, not barking, not corporate, just tired, like someone who finally realized they were sitting in a hole they helped dig. "Melanie, it's Robert Hollowgate." Still, she said nothing. Let him sit in the mess he helped create. It was her turn now. "We didn't realize," he continued, voice low, stripped of every layer of executive polish, "how tied everything was to your protocols, your work." Or he paused, exhaled, "Your rhythm." She closed her eyes and let the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat, not to be cruel, just to rebalance the scale. Finally, she spoke, voice level and clear. "You realized, you just didn't listen." He didn't argue. She took another sip of coffee. "I'll consider returning," she said finally, "but I have conditions." He didn't hesitate, name them. "I'll send a list," she said, "one email. One time, you agree to it all. I'll walk back in. You push back on a single clause, you can watch the floor bleed until Q4. The line was quiet for a moment. Then, understood, she hung up. No pleasantries, no fake promises. Just business the way they always claimed they wanted it. She walked to her old laptop and opened a clean draft. Subject, return terms. Beneath it, she wrote 12 bullet points. No fluff, no begging, just facts. Full reinstatement of prior role, in your systems calibrator, plus operations consultant title. Compensation adjusted to match market plus 10%. Sole control of calibration protocols. No committee approval. Direct line to CFO for budgetary needs. Independent tech assistant, hire of her choosing. No interference from executive family. No executive family allowed in control rooms, maintenance bays, or calibration terminals. Chloe Hollowgate barred from any operational input regarding systems management. Jason Hollowgate to be reassigned or removed. Legacy system backups to be stored securely under dual authorization, hers and CFO's. No social media content creation permitted on factory floor. Final clause. Violation of these terms results in immediate resignation with full severance, retroactive bonus, and public statement of fault issued by executive office. She attached a single file. If you really need MeZip, then hit send. She didn't check for a reply, didn't need to, because if they wanted the factory to live, they'd meet every line without question. And if they didn't, well, she had peace, they had chaos. The boots hit the concrete like they never left. Same scuffed toes, same oil-stained laces, same sole with the worn spot near the heel that always squeaked by the coolant tanks. Melanie walked through the service entrance at 7:12 a.m. with the same gait she had 20 years ago. Steady, unbothered, immune to the anxious glances, and side-eye from people who suddenly remembered who'd held this place together. She didn't pause to wave, didn't nod, just walked with the kind of silence that speaks louder than panic. In one hand, her battered thermos. In the other, the flash drive. Wrapped in electrical tape, label half-peeled, still warm from the pocket she'd kept it in since sunrise. Chloe wasn't there. Her glass-walled office was dark, nameplate gone. No kombucha bottles, no Bluetooth speaker softly playing some podcast about optimization or hustle culture. No sign of that hollow laughter that used to echo down the stairs like fake perfume. Just an empty desk and a single pink blazer, draped over the back of a chair like a flag of surrender. Jason, long gone. Rumor had it he left sometime after 1:00 a.m. HR had to print out a badge for him to exit because he couldn't figure out how to log himself out of the access system. His last act on site, forgetting his iPad in the server room, where it now sat face down under a stack of unused safety checklists. Melanie made her way past the calibration desk, past Greg the foreman, who didn't say a word, but stepped aside like a bishop parting for the high priest. Others watched, Debbie near the molding units, Pete behind his mop as she reached her old workstation. The drawer opened with a soft clunk. Her binder was still there, her logbook, her notes, untouched, unread, like relics waiting for the priestess to return. She plugged in the flash drive. The terminal blinked to life. Legacy token detected. Override confirmed. The screen lit green. One by one, the machines exhaled. You could feel it in the air. The floor breathed. Belts shivered once, synced. Presses paused, recalibrated, restarted in tempo. The temperature sensors corrected. The line map blinked from amber to green to full power. Conveyor 6A hummed like it had missed her. Greg watched, arms crossed, mouth twitching like he didn't want to smile but couldn't help it. Good to have the band back together, he muttered. She didn't reply. Instead, she handed him a sealed envelope, thick, typed, signed. The updated terms. Already agreed to, already executed. He flipped through the pages. His eyebrows lifted when he hit clause 7. No family interference, he read aloud. Permanent? She nodded once. Then turned back to the console. The owner was waiting upstairs. She knew that. Knew he'd probably rehearsed some speech about appreciation, about lessons learned, about how sometimes we fail to recognize greatness in our own backyard. She didn't care. She wouldn't be going up. Because respect, once taken, isn't bought back with flowers and guilt. It's earned. And today they were finally paying what they owed. The floor clapped. Not a standing ovation, just 3 or 4 people, slow, real, raw, calloused hands hitting grease-stained palms, the sound of quiet redemption. She didn't smile. She just tapped the keys, eyes on the screen, listening as the system came back to life under her command. The hum returned. And this time it bowed to her. Server bay smelled like warm dust and quiet redemption. 1 week since the shutdown. 7 days since the chaos bled out and order returned, not because some consultant waved a wand, but because the woman they'd exiled came back and made the system remember who it was. Melanie stood with her hands in her pockets, watching the monitors. Green lights danced across the screen like a heartbeat restored. Conveyor speeds, nominal. Thermal readouts, steady. Oscillators, balanced. The floor below moved like a synchronized animal again, lean, quiet, precise. A new junior tech stood beside her, probably 23, hair too neat, eyes too anxious. His name was Kyle or maybe Ryan. They changed every 6 months now. He glanced at the readouts, then back at her. What should I do if the belts fall out of sync again? Melanie didn't turn. Just handed him a folder. Paper. Not a tablet. Not a PDF. A damn folder. Annotated, tabbed, creased at the edges. Follow the rhythm, she said, and listen to the machines. He blinked. The machines? She finally looked at him just enough to raise one eyebrow. They'll tell you what's wrong. They always do, if you're not too busy trying to optimize them to hear it. He nodded like he understood. He didn't. But someday, maybe, he would. She left him there and moved down the row, checking the legacy nodes sync against her backup logbook. Not because she didn't trust the system, because trust needed verification. Always did. Across the bay window, movement caught her eye. Chloe, clipboard in hand, blazer buttoned tight. No camera crew, no heels, no entourage. Just her walking stiff-backed along the top floor walkway, pretending to review a report. She slowed when she reached the glass above the bay. She saw Melanie, paused. And for a second, just 1 second, her mask cracked. She looked. Not scowled, not glared, just looked. Eyes lingering longer than they should have. Melanie didn't move, didn't nod, didn't smirk. She just stood there, steady as a pressure gauge, letting the moment stretch. Then Chloe looked away and walked on. No words, no apology, no need. That was the victory. Not the applause, not the paycheck, not even the contract that now bore her name beside the owners, equal signatories. The real win was this: silence where there used to be smugness, deference where there used to be dismissal. a system that ran smooth not because it was coded right, but because it remembered who made it whole. The camera feed looped on the main monitor. Green-lit conveyor belts, thermal systems breathing in rhythm. Everything moving like it had a soul again. Some systems don't run on code, they run on memory.